Okay. Today we're going to talk about foods that don't need Bishul Yisroel. I chose that topic because it's almost Hanukkah. Last time we're going to talk about these kind of things before Hanukkah. So the way I thought of it was the Yavanim were trying to get Klal Yisrael to be mixed up with the Musar and get us together and integrated with them. So this is one Takonos Chazal made to keep us separate, and keep us apart. So I figured that was a good enough choice for a reason to choose this. And I didn't want to talk about olive oil, so that was the other choice. Okay. There are, as usual, today's going to be like a kitzer type of share. There's three things that help us decide whether it's criteria, whether something needs to be Bishul Yisroel, and they are: it has to not be pas, that's one thing. It has to be nechal, not edible raw, and it has to be shulchan. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about. So the two of the takonos that Chazal made, the first one is about not being a pas. Two takonos Chazal made are called pas Yisroel and Bishul Yisroel, and there's a big difference between them. They're similar, that a yid has to be some part of the cooking, but one significant difference is that nowadays, for whatever reasons, we say that pas palter is mutter. Pas made by a commercial baker is mutter. So essentially that means is when we give Hashgachah, if something is pas, we from Hashgachah perspective, don't have to care whether the yid was part of it, because pas palter is mutter. As consumers, also many people eat pas palter. That's sort of a separate issue. But from a Hashgachah perspective, if the food is considered to be pas, then so to speak, we're off the hook. We don't have to worry about a yid being part of it. So we only have to. So if a food is not pas, then we have to think, maybe it needs Bishul Yisroel. But if it doesn't need, if it's not, if it's pas, then we're off the hook. So our first qualification to see if something needs Bishul Yisroel is maybe it's pas. Okay. So it turns out there's three things that it takes to make something to be pas. And you have to have all three of these in order to be considered pas. Okay, the first one is that it has to have the 5 doughnuts. It's got to have, it has to have at least some of the 5 doughnuts in it. So, for example, if you have rice or rice cakes or corn tortillas or things like that, they're not passably pas. They're not passably pas, and therefore then at least they're in the potential to be in the rules of Bishul Yisroel. In this, I'll mention. Plug ourselves, mention that there are things that are gluten-free. People have this impression if they're gluten-free, then they don't have the 5 doughnuts. I just throw in that there's such thing as gluten-free oats. That's one of the 5 doughnuts, and therefore those things potentially impossible. Again, if it is or is not, but it's not automatic that it's not possible. Okay, that's the first. The second is this thing that's made with the 5 doughnuts has to have teresa de nahama. It has to tayar lechem. It has to look like bread, which means is. An example with the rule bin comes from Taisus. Taisus' example of what does not have tayar lechem is pasta, because bread is soft and fluffy, and pasta is hard, but it's like pliable. It doesn't have, it all seem like fluffy like bread, so that doesn't have tayar lechem. It's not teresa de nahama. So certain other things that are more, many people will say don't have tayar lechem. It's like breakfast cereal and little pretzels. Because they don't have tayar lechem. There's a shayla about whether wraps do or don't have teresa de nahama, whether they have tayar lechem. That has an interesting twist to that shayla to it, because it's a beferish among from that a wrap does not have tayar lechem. It's so thin and like that, it doesn't like bread. And the shayla, what it depends on, why should you think it does? I mean, it's a beferish din that doesn't, is because is tayar lechem something that's an objective standard? If you look at a wrap and you look at a piece of bread, they have no shaykhs. They don't look at all like each other. They're very different from each other. So no, it doesn't have tayar lechem. Or should you say, it depends on what people eat with meals. What do people make sandwiches out of? So with a piece of bread, you make a sandwich. You don't make a sandwich out of spaghetti. So in that case, when the Ram says no, nobody makes sandwiches out of that. But nowadays that people do make sandwiches out of it, it became a normal thing that people do that. Maybe that's just
that was matzah. The Karchi Rifsa, they always use that language. They had wraps. They actually ate wraps, and that was matzah.
And therefore what?
The flat ones were matzah.
And
the pistils were chametz, and the flat ones were matzah.
And therefore,
I know some people are not confident at all that that's not tayar lechem.
So to Magen Avraham, I'm saying that's Magen Avraham.
He's thinner. Magen Avraham's thinner. I don't know, like
No, not thinner than a wrap. Wrap is as thin as it gets. I mean, what's thinner than that?
A wafer.
The wafers you think are thinner than that? Okay.
That's what the Rabbi told me.
Okay.
Okay. What about the fact that it probably was matzah? It's probably what the real.
And therefore what?
Was obviously it's Taylor. It was the olden day matzah.
Right. So I think of olden day matzah as being more like a pita or a lava. Yeah.
Pita is chametz.
Oh, it doesn't have to be chametz. It doesn't have to be chametz. No, pita doesn't have to be chametz. If you make
if you make it like a wrap. If you make it like a wrap.
No, if you make it quickly. If you should make it in less than 18 minutes, it'll become it.
It doesn't look like a wrap, you make it quickly?
Why? You make it as thick as you want to. It could be a matzah could be up to a tefach thick. I mean, you can make it as thick as you want. The thickness does not make it not.
Okay.
I watched somebody make pita. I watched a million years ago. Watched them make pita. They mix flour and water. They put it onto the thing, and 3 minutes later they had a pita. Didn't rise. Didn't have any yeast. Nothing. Flour and water. They put onto the thing.
It wasn't like a wrap.
No, it was a pita. It came out like a real pita.
Like a pita.
Yeah, like matzah.
I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that being chametz.
Okay, it feels like
look at the cabinet of chametz.
Okay, come on. Let's see. The third criteria to be lechem is it has to be baked. Okay, which is to say is something that's fried or cooked is not considered a pas. We pass it's not considered pas. So, for example, if you have donuts. So donuts are fried. Again, also. So donuts are fried. So even though they have lechem, they're very bread-like. They're fluffy and exactly like a piece of bread, and they have the melachim. But since they're fried, they're not considered to be pas, and therefore they're potentially in the rules of Bishul Yisroel. That might potentially be Bishul Yisroel. Okay, now after I told you all the three things that make something into pas, there's one more thing, a separate thing, which is
the fried thing is machlokes, right?
Correct, and we pass it. We pass it. I didn't say it's automatic. Okay, now within things that are in the rules of pas, there's a sort of a subcategory, which is passably. Passably is things that are they're sort of pas, but they're sort of not pas. Okay, in our Chaim, it gives 3 examples of it. We'll take those 3 examples. One is things that are crunchy, like the crackers. That's one kind of thing that's possible kissing. One is things that have something else mixed into it or put on top of it, like pizza. Okay, so it's a dough. The dough is perfectly fine, like plain old dough, but it has something on top of sauce and cheese. And the other one is something that has a lot of additives that make it have a big taste, like the chocolate cake. Okay, the chocolate cake, again, is everything else about pas about it, except that it has this chocolate in it that has this really strong taste. So those are passably. So in Hilchos Challah, those are considered pas. You have to be mafresh on them. In Hilchos Brachas, they have this in-between status that depends how you eat it. If you make a meal out of it, you make hamotzi, and if you eat it like a snack, you make masonis. But the Rambam says that for our dinim, it's considered pas also. Like in Hilchos Challah, it's considered pas. That is. It's considered pas, and therefore, you wouldn't have to be participate in making it. It would be pas palter, it would be mutter. Okay? And so that's our first condition. First thing we have to get through is to get to the rules of Bishul Yisroel, we have to make sure it's not pas. So we are pushed away all these things that might potentially be pas. That to meet Bishul Yisroel, it has to be past that point. Okay. So now the other 2 things we'll talk about are the well-known things. Is it has to be not nechal and the Oleh shalom. So nechal is like this. For most foods, it's pretty obvious whether a food is nechal. Okay, if you have an apple, apple's a nechal. If you have a potato, or you have rice is not nechal. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. Most foods is pretty obvious whether they're edible raw or they're not edible raw. Okay, so there's a couple of details to talk about. And that's like this. What happens when we have a food? When we have a food that you can't eat it raw by itself, but you could if you mix it with other foods. Okay, if you mix other foods together with it, then you're going to be able to eat it raw. Okay, so there's machlokes about this, machlokes shulchan about that, and nechal as well. Mishmur is mekel about that. Okay, and that thing is considered to be nechal, and therefore onions are an example of this, of a food that's considered nechal, because even though most people wouldn't eat onions raw, if you could sit there, it would make it easier for me. Most people wouldn't eat onions straight. Okay, they wouldn't just eat raw onions. Most people, but if you chop them up and put into salad, people eat them all the time like that. Okay, so onions in the salad is fine. So today, because we're doing Hashgachah Practicum, I don't have my melachim. I have
What?
chapter 44. You have to go look at my Sefer chapter 44.
Is it Shabbos or the
I don't remember, because if I had Maram Kami's on the bottom, I'd tell you, but here the Maram Kami says, look in the Sefer in chapter 44, this whole section. So you go back to your office and you can... So they said to Rabbi, okay, if that's true, they said, so then potatoes are also nechachai, because there are people who chop up tiny pieces of raw potatoes, slivered potatoes, into their salads also. There's such a musag, and people do that. So he said, no. He said, those people aren't eating. It's not onions that you like onions, but they're really strong, so you put them into a salad. But in the salad, they taste perfectly fine. He says, over here, it's that you want to have the crunchiness of the raw food. It's like sort of like excites your palate to eat this unusual food. He says, but you're not really liking raw food.
raw potatoes crunchy.
Yeah. So it's like a twist to your food. So he said that doesn't apply. Okay. So now, the question: if I told you that onions are nechachai because you could just by cutting them up and mixing them with some other stuff, all of a sudden you can make them edible. So now the question is: so how about fish? Fish you could also, if you take fish and you put a lot of salt onto it and you mix it with salt. It's something called brining. You put a lot of salt onto it, then you can eat them also without cooking them.
What's simpler than that? Is it?
No. I should have thought to talk about sushi. I didn't think that. I'm not prepared. I'm putting sushi on the side.
Which is cut up fish.
Okay, so I forgot to include sushi in here, so I'm not going to talk to you about sushi. Okay, put that on the side.
So you got fish.
Yeah.
With sushi.
Right.
So you say exactly right.
Of course not.
We're not going to talk about that.
He's not saying about sushi. He's disputing you. You said it's fish and not a guy.
Okay.
It's actually very good.
No, it's only a steak tartare. People eat meat raw. People eat ground beef raw. Yeah. So it's,
Okay. So the question is, by fish you could take even people who wouldn't eat sashimi, okay, wouldn't eat the raw fish like you guys did. But even people like that, if you take fish and you put a lot of salt, put enough salt onto it, let it sit for a while, then you can eat it. You brining it, it becomes perfectly edible. So if so why do we say that fish needs to be Bishul Yisroel? Why do you say it's not nechachai? Of course it's nechachai. You just again, if onions can be cut up and mixed with cucumbers and all of a sudden they become edible, that's good enough. So fish that I cut up, excuse me. I take fish and I put some salt onto it and I let it sit for a couple of minutes, then it's good enough also. Okay, so it's the answer. Once you hear the answer, you'll see it's obvious. You think that's why you're sitting here scratching it. It's not even a question because it's obvious. Okay, this is Rafal said this and Chachmas says, and anybody would say that if you think for a second, you'll realize the difference. The difference is like this: in the case of the onions, you're eating raw onions. You don't want to eat such a strong thing. The onion itself is too strong, so you mix it with cucumbers and tomatoes, and now you can eat it. But be'etzem, you're eating raw onions. Okay, you have to do something just to make it. You can eat it raw, just like sort of spread it out a little bit. But the fish, you don't want to eat the raw fish. You want to eat fish that's not raw. You made it unraw through a process that in Hilchos Bishul, making things edible through cooking is not considered cooking. That's a detail in Hilchos Bishul. But really, you made it not raw anymore. It's not raw fish anymore. It's not like the onion, which is still a raw onion, but it's just you have only a little less of it rather than the whole thing. Here, it's not a raw fish anymore. The fish is not raw anymore. It's now part of the fish that you have is now a cooked fish. Okay, it's not cooked technically for Bishul rules, but etzem, it's made not raw anymore. When it was in the raw state, most of us wouldn't have eaten. Okay, so that's why fish are not considered nechachai. Okay, so that explains the difference between onions and fish. But that
you did that type of fish. If you did it to fish and the God cooked it, it would be okay, right?
Yeah, that's a separate. Yes, if you made it, yes, you're correct. If you would do that to the fish, now it's edible. At that point, if the guy cooks it, would be nothing. Yes, that's correct. And in fact, that's what they do. I wasn't going to talk about that. But there's a salmon. There's two ways to make salmon. You could cold smoke it. That's fine. That's fair. The guy could do it. Then there's hot smoked salmon, which is basically cooked in an oven, and then they sprinkle smoke flavor onto it. So in order to make it, that would be Bishul. So a long time ago, when they started making this idea that you could hot smoke things with basically just in an oven, someone from the Rabbi convinced the companies that they always brine it first and then they smoke it. So he convinced them that instead of brining a little bit and smoking a lot and cooking a lot, they should brine a lot and smoke a little and cook a little. And this way, it's completely edible before they get to the smoking stage, to the hot smoking. So the whole industry does it because of him. Literally, and he did it for Kashrus reasons. He convinced them to do this. His motivation was for the Kashrus of it. So you have to check it. Like we used to give Hashgachah on a place that they had smoking, and that's what we did. We tasted it first to make sure that they brined for long enough that by the time they got to the cooking point, it was not officially salt. Anyway, so now comes a question. So the Gerson asked a question. He said, Rebelsky said that the reason why beets don't need to be Bishul Yisroel is because of Nechal. Because you could take beets and you could eat them, mix them with horseradish, and then it's what we call grain, prepared horseradish. We call it grain, but that's what you eat. It's beets with horseradish. So you could eat beets raw. You can't eat beets raw by themselves. You bite into them and you can't eat them. But if you into a raw beet, but if you mix it with horseradish, all of a sudden you can eat it. So he said, this. Well, some people cook it commercially. No, they don't cook it. To which Rabbi Gerson said, he says, yeah, they don't cook it. In your house, you might cook it. Commercially, they don't cook it, but they pickle it. What they do is they pickle it, or they pickle it with the horseradish, and then that makes it edible. He says, so we're doing the same thing. We're taking something that's be'etzem, you wouldn't eat it raw. We're finding a way to make it edible, not, again, through a way that's technically not cooking for Hilchos Bishul Akum. Pickling is technically not considered cooking for Bishul Akum. And we're making it unraw, and then we're eating it. He says, so that doesn't count. That's the same as the fish. We found a way to make it not raw. That's why we're eating it. We don't eat it raw. Nobody eats beets raw.
So there is Bishul Akum.
So he's saying, and therefore, he answered a question on Rebelsky.
Right.
I don't remember Rebelsky answered, if he answered
I
that.
thought you said for Rebelsky that's not true. They just put it in straight raw.
But it's not the truth. That's not the truth. That's not the truth if I didn't say it. I don't know if I didn't say it, but it's not the truth that they put it in. So our Schwartz thought this is correct. We told him what Gerson said. He said, yeah, that was correct.
First,
So,
they pickle it first.
and the male, that doesn't count. You can't call Nechal because of that. Now, it happens to be that beets don't need Bishul Yisroel for a different reason, because in Oleh, that's a separate angle of it. Okay, but from the Nechal angle of it, that didn't seem like such a good argument. Okay. Now, next is, if you have foods that are Nechal, but there's two versions of how the Shulchan Aruch brings this. One are things that are barely edible raw, and one of them that are passably edible raw, like Aidet Chak, So in the ones that are passably edible raw, he has certain kinds of fish that he has a passably edible raw, and we're machmir on it to say that that's not considered Nechal. That needs Bishul Yisroel. Because even though you could eat it, but it's very hard to eat it. It's a case that Shulchan Aruch has a certain kind of fish that you eat with a little salt on it, and all of a sudden you could eat. Okay? And in another case, eggs are considered barely edible raw. There's the machlokes in the Gemara, and there we paskin that they are not considered Nechal. The eggs are not considered Nechal because you could eat it, but it's not like you're passably like Aidet Chak. It's like really Aidet Chak. It's like more unreasonable to eat it, and they need Bishul Yisroel also, because they're not considered Nechal. Okay, so what about that? There are foods that are made. You can make desserts with eggs that are not cooked. Okay, there's different couple of options of ways to use eggs that are not cooked that make them edible, that you could eat them. So the feeling is that Hagam, that it's true. There are ways to do it, but 99% of the eggs are not eaten like that. So there's such a thing. There is such a way to eat them raw, but the overwhelming majority of eggs, our company makes it.
Mix it to something or write something.
What?
Mix it to something or write something.
Always mix it to something. Yes, always mix it to something. There's different ways to make it. Maybe like your example of ice cream is mix it to other things. But that wouldn't bother us if there's a way. If that would also be Nechal. But Lamai says there's such a tiny percentage of the eggs are made like that. We have. Our company makes a million eggs a day, hard-boiled eggs. That's the way normal people eat are cooked. So the fact that there is a meshugana way to eat them, not a meshugana, one unusual way to eat them, that's not.
I think it's unusual. It's just not a minority.
It's a very small minority that doesn't count. Okay, we're going to come back to eggs in a few minutes. Okay, for now we're just leaving the eggs the way they are, which is that they're Nechal Aidet Chak, and so I say real Aidet Chak, and therefore that's not considered Nechal. Okay, one more thing to do with Nechal, and that is like this. The Shach says, here's a food called they are hard agasim. I don't know what they are. I mean, in modern Hebrew, that means an agas is a pear. I have no idea if that's what it really meant. Some kind of fruit, whatever it is. He says that generally people eat it when it's cooked, but you can eat it raw. Yeah, if you want, you can eat it raw. Okay, so the Shach says that food is considered nechal. That food is nechal, and it does not need to be Bishul Yisroel. That's what the Shach says.
Like squash, zucchini.
Maybe I don't know what hard agasim are. Maybe it is that you could really eat it if you wanted to.
Right.
Okay, so
it's salad, but most people eat it.
okay, maybe. So like this. We're basically explaining like this. I'm not even sure if your case, if your squash is a good case. Maybe, because like this, he said it's a food that people, if you ate it raw, it tastes perfectly fine. It tastes fine when you eat it raw. But people prefer the cooked taste. It's like a preference. People like that food better in the cooked form, and since they like it better in the cooked form, that they like that, and almost everybody's eating it like that. But Lamai says it's perfectly fine in the other form, as opposed to a potato. Potatoes don't taste good raw. Okay, it's not like we prefer them cooked. They don't taste like anything raw. You can't eat them raw. Okay, so so imagine if one day America would switch and everybody would eat only baked apples. Okay, they wouldn't eat raw apples. Okay, so that would be the thing. Everybody wanted to eat their apples as baked apples. But the raw apples would still taste perfectly fine. So the fact that we have a preference for baked apples wouldn't make a difference. It wouldn't make them not nechal.
I didn't hear carrots was like animals.
I was about to say carrots.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but now there's probably a decent percentage that eat them raw.
Yeah, certainly everybody.
Right, no, but it's fine. So he's saying if we go back then and we look at it with the people, when you eat it raw, so if people consider it edible, maybe their tastes were different. They takatoros taste strange. I don't know. Okay. Now, because of that, the nafkamina from the Shach was like, okay, the Shach is talking about some fruit that we never heard of, was for sweet corn. Okay, there's two types of corn. Most of the corn that you see growing on the side of the highway is what they call cow corn or field corn, which you can't eat. I mean, you have to cook it for hours to make it edible. Okay, it's a whole process to make it edible. It's like when you make tortillas out of it. It's a kind of a corn. Most corn products are made of this field corn that are no way in the world that it's nechal. And I'm not a chance that it's nechal. But the corn that you have, like canned corn or corn on the cob, that's sweet corn. It's a different variety of corn, and it's typically we eat it cooked. And it's a normal thing you do when you have corn. You take corn on the cob, you cook it. Or canned corn is also, of course, if it's canned, then it's cooked. Okay, those are cooked foods. But to the surprise of most people, it tastes perfectly fine raw. Okay, it tastes perfectly fine if you eat it. If you take a bite out of sweet corn, okay, if you take a bite out of field corn, you'll probably break your teeth. But if you take a bite out of sweet corn, it tastes perfectly fine. Right, that's what most people say. Come on, it can't be such a thing.
Supermarket and pick up corn on the cob, unhusk it, you just eat it.
Yes, 100%. So,
You've tried it. So,
yes.
That's what the supermarket. It usually stands on the side of the road to eat.
We may have to stop Dr. Langer if you want to eat it straight out of the supermarket. I'm not sure if we're allowed to say that. You could just eat them, but yes.
At that point, we weren't.
At those days. So that's the reason why canned corn doesn't need to be Bishul Yisroel. Doesn't need to be Bishul Yisroel because it's this Shach that's talking about. This is an example of that Shach. So Shach said, he said, okay, the Shach is fine, no problem. The Shach is correct. He said, but the Shach says that people almost everybody eats it in the cooked state, but there are people who eat it raw. He says, so at least there are some people eating it raw. He said, but we have a food that you say, in theory, it's nechal. In theory, and if you actually go to the supermarket and you taste it, you'll find it's nechal. He said, but nobody eats it raw. So he says, so how can you tell me? Wait a second. So he says, how can you tell me that that's considered nechal? He says, in theory, it would taste good. He says, and most people's reaction is like you said, really? No, of course you can't eat it raw. So just because there's such a thing, in theory, it's not good enough. Okay, so that's what Shach said. So years later, when I was here at the CRC, we polled our Twitter followers and asked them to answer whether they eat, what they think about it being nechal. Okay, so we got about 200 people who responded to that request, to thing, and it came out that be'erach 13% of the people said they eat raw once in a while, and 6% of the people said they do it all the time. They eat it raw. Okay, so that, in other words, that it's not nobody. It's not only crazy kids who grab it out of the bag and eat it, but it's enough that we should say it's good enough. That's considered nechal. Because the etzim it is just for Shach to say, but nobody does it. Not true that nobody does it. The type of people who do it.
Of course, you have nothing out there that canned foods and other shulchan.
Why do you think that canned corn is not shulchan?
Canned corn?
Yeah.
They would never serve canned products at a banquet.
That's a myth. Why do you think they wouldn't serve canned? There are those who say that, but it's a case by case. There's no etzem rule like that.
Really? I thought it just a cases of quality. They would never do that.
I don't know if that's
Wow.
true.
So according to Schechter, the OU canned corn is straight.
That was his argument. He was saying whether they follow that, I don't understand. But his argument was that the corn, nobody eats it. You know? I don't know if you heard about our poll, but okay. Okay, so now we move on to our last criterion, and that is to be Oleh shulchan mlachim. So the first thing is just to define what that means, to be Oleh shulchan mlachim. So there's a famous story. The Schwab went to the Chazon Ish. He spent this famous Shabbos there, like 1,000 stories of when he spent the Shabbos at the Chazon Ish. So anyhow, so he spent time with the Chazon Ish, I'm sorry. No, sorry, wrong story. Yeah, that was the story of the Chazon Ish, sorry. Separately, he went to the Chazon Ish, and the Chazon Ish told him that sardines need to be Bishul Yisroel. So he said to him, and of course they're not. But I mean, nowadays...
Did they come in cans in those days?
Yeah, sardines. Oh, they're born in cans, you know? So the sardines, of course, and then there wasn't like Hashgachahs back in those days, so people eating sardines, it was not Bishul Yisroel. There wasn't any chance of it being Bishul Yisroel. So he said, what are you talking about? But I know all these Rosh Yeshiva who eat sardines, they're just regular sardines. There's no Bishul Yisroel. They have no Hashgachah, anything. So he said, he says that, and Schwab said, because they don't think it's Oleh shulchan mlachim. And we think that anybody serves sardines at shulchan mlachim. And Chazon said, no. He says the Queen of England, I'm sorry, at that time it was the King of England. That's how long ago it was. The King of England eats them for breakfast. So that's Oleh shulchan mlachim, because the King of England eats them. Okay, so the machotes we're hearing, the two sides we're hearing here is, does Oleh shulchan mlachim means that the king eats it? Meaning there are certain things that it's like not, it's below his dignity to eat a certain kinds of food. He has certain self-respect that he wouldn't eat certain foods, which is a very small group of foods. It's a very small category. And nowadays, our kings have, stepped down that many rungs that there's almost nothing. Maybe it only means that he eats at a meal. Okay, so maybe like his snack foods don't count. But almost everything would qualify as Oleh shulchan mlachim. Correct. Even cereal milk, because if that's what he eats for breakfast, he eats Cheerios. It's Cheerios. Okay, but. And others are saying that shulchan mlachim means when he's functioning as a king. If our king sits and watches a football game and he's munching on pretzels, then he's not being a king. Then he's just being another guy in the street. He's not anything. Okay, so that's the shaila of how we should judge shulchan mlachim. So there's a well-known to do. Most of the American hashgachas follow this other way of saying, like Schwab thought. That Oleh shulchan mlachim means what he does when he functions like as a king. So like what we judge it as is like a wedding, and Rabbi Reese is like a dress-up banquet. That's the way he described it. Something that you have to, as opposed to what they serve you at a bris or at a brunch, that's considered not Oleh shulchan mlachim. Okay, that's just a way to be mocked to it. And that there's a twist in that. I said to Rabbi Reese, what do you think about if there's an ethnic food that you would serve at a nice Jewish event, but you would never serve it at a non-Jewish event? I'm going to tell you in a second. And what do you think that food is considered Oleh shulchan mlachim? He thought it was. He thought that food would be, it's Oleh shulchan mlachim. For us, we would serve it as shulchan mlachim. So the example of that was, I don't know if this example told her Schwartz or Reese. The example was, I'm trying to remember the exact food that it was. It's going to come to me. It'll come to me maybe before we finish.
Not Shalom and Kishka, I hope.
It could have been that. It could have been that.
So
that's not the right word. It's not the right example. I'm trying to remember the example. The example that we had was they went to a caterer. They asked him about the food slips my mind. They asked him about a certain food, and he said to him like this. They said to him, "Would you serve this food as shulchan mlachim?" So like at a fancy wedding, we serve it. He's like this. And that's why I wish I had actually remember the example. He said, "If I was serving."
Get the book from my office.
If I was serving this, if I gave this food out at an Ashkenazi wedding, they would throw me out. I would get fired. But if I didn't serve it at a Sephardi wedding, I would get fired for the opposite, Just something like the styles of how people, I wish I could remember the food. Anyhow, it'll come to me. Anyhow, so he's very useful that if it's an ethnic food, meaning a food that you didn't like, but people who are not Jewish wouldn't eat, he said that is considered shul. Okay.
I don't get it. Is it pshat because the king would serve it at a Jewish event?
Because we don't need to have a king. We don't need to have a Jewish king. The point is just, is it a chashuv food? The real Oleh shulchan comes from that.
If there would be a Jewish king,
If it would be a Jewish king?
No, it's that what Oleh shulchan, what's behind Oleh shulchan is that when the guy cooks his food for me, I feel a closeness because he did me something valuable. So it really depends on what I would look at. How do I judge this food? To me, is this a chashuv food or is it not a chashuv food?
Even though I agree, it shouldn't be served at a kingly.
No, you serve, but for me, it would serve it. If I was having at my wedding, they would serve it. So to me, you've given me something chashuv. Okay, you can look at differently. Okay. Now,
typically we go with the Jews, right? Follow. Good.
Right.
Whenever we define what is the derech,
So what would a Jewish king serve?
yeah.
okay, if that makes you feel better. Okay. Next is, another question is, what happens if we have a food, that's Oleh shulchan, but there's different ways to prepare the food. Okay, there's different ways to prepare this food, and some of them are Oleh shulchan and some of them are not. Okay, so I have 3 variations of that question. Okay, the first is, what? That's my second one. Give me a second. So the first one, so you guys will remember from 97 years ago when we learned it the first time. Yeah?
Right.
Okay, so the first is like this. What the simplest case is, a guy makes a baked potato. Okay, makes a baked potato. But he's not such a great chef. So the baked potato that he makes is not as good as the baked potato that a real chef makes that's Oleh shulchan. Okay? He doesn't do as good of a job. He doesn't bake it the right amount of time. He doesn't put in the spices. It doesn't come out exactly the way it's supposed to. But by and large, the thing that we're looking at is the same baked potato that the non-Jew, that is Oleh shulchan. Okay, so there, most people assume that that's considered a food that's ishlachim. Okay, the fact that he doesn't do just as fine of a job, but give or take, this is a baked potato. So a baked potato is a baked potato, and it needs to be Bishul Yisroel. Okay, that's the first case. The second case is potato chips. That's our second case. With here, potato chips, no matter what you do with them, no matter what, potato chips are not Oleh shulchan. But there are other ways of making fried potatoes that are Oleh shulchan. Okay, we're going to, for purposes of the example, we're going to say, let's say latkes are Oleh shulchan. Let's just assume they are. We're going to say it's a fried potato, that's Oleh shulchan. So if we have another way of frying potatoes. But this is one version, this is a different version. Latkes and potato chips are not the same thing. So there's a question that some people say is, since fried potatoes are Oleh shulchan, so all fried potatoes need to be Bishul Yisroel. Okay? And other people say is, no, fried potatoes that look like latkes wouldn't need Bishul Yisroel, and potato chips don't need Bishul Yisroel. Okay? Most of the national American hashgachas will make about that. Others,
because it's a different form.
Because it's a whole different food. They're both fried, but the question, should we compare this to potatoes or should we not get to the baked potato or not? We're saying it's nothing like a baked potato. A latke and a potato chip are not the same food. They're both fried, but they're,
I was President Rebelski when he was asked about this. At that time he said, because potatoes are not Oleh shulchan in fried states.
So that's not addressing the question then. Then you just don't like my example.
No. He said no. If it would be, there would be a problem.
Okay.
You're not saying that. I'm just telling you what I was saying.
Okay. That's not.
You said
that's
that's
not
not
how I
the
heard it.
policy.
That's not how I heard it. Now, you as you may know, there's a short tshuva from Moshe, and there's reported from Yaakov Kamenetsky that they said potato chips need Bishul Yisroel, and this would be the thinking is that because there's other ways to make fried potatoes. Most hashgachas don't follow that. There are plenty of people who want it, who say they want it to be Bishul Yisroel. It tends to go with, it tends to go with things that are made with Hashgachah Tmeets anyhow, like things that are made with, like a Hamish Hechsher goes and makes a run in a place, they're doing Hashgachah Tmeets anyhow, so the Hashgachah Tmeets anyhow, so one gets on the fire. It's like, hello, the guy's there anyhow, But anyhow, so most of
But they wouldn't. Hamish Hechsher would not, at this point, they would not do potato chips without Bishul Yisroel.
because there are people who are expecting it. You know what I mean? But I don't know if that's where it's saying. I'm not sure if it started from the din or if it started from the practicality of it, but okay, that's fine. Okay, and the last case, and our third case is tuna fish. Okay, and that's like this. For this example, you're going to have to take on an assumption we're not talking about today, and that is that if a food is steaming the etzem is not a reason to get out of Bishul Yisroel. Okay? We'll talk about a different time. That the fact that something is steamed might in itself make it that's not considered cooking. Okay? But ignore that for now. Okay? So tuna, the fish itself, if you cut it up into slices and you make what they call tuna steaks and you broil them, that's Oleh shulchan. Okay, they serve it in fancy restaurants. You get it at a wedding. They serve it, I don't know, a wedding, but at a fancy event, they serve you tuna steaks. Broiled tuna steaks is Oleh shulchan. But tuna that's in your can, the way it gets into your can, it gets cooked before it gets into the can, and in the can, but it gets cooked before the can also, and that is, it's cooked by steaming. I said to you, ignore the fact that steaming might pot you from Bishul. Put that on the side for now. So, steamed tuna is not Oleh shulchan. You would never serve that to a company, steamed tuna. Okay, so here it's not. One way of preparing the fish would be Oleh shulchan, one way would be not. But it's not the same method of preparation. It's not like beforehand by the potato chips where they're both fried. Here one is baked or broiled, and one of them is steamed. There's two totally different ways of cooking. So here almost nobody thinks that needs Bishul Yisroel. Almost no one thinks that should need Bishul Yisroel, because tuna, in theory, there's all way to prepare a tuna to be Oleh shulchan. That's what's the difference? In the potato chips, there are two ways to fry a potato. So fried and fried, you say, well, since fried potatoes are Oleh shulchan, so all fried needs Oleh shulchan, like baked potatoes, like I told you in my first case. The other side to say is that, no, this over here, one is baked and one is steamed. There's two total ways of cooking. You can't make steamed tuna that's Oleh shulchan.
Yeah. Can you steam a steak? Can you steam a steak of tuna?
Yeah, of course you could.
You don't think that would be good to Oleh shulchan?
No, it would be pathetic. No, it wouldn't taste good. No. It's just not a way of preparing food. It's like, imagine these steamed pieces of chicken.
It's not Oleh shulchan, it's in little pieces, it just doesn't look like.
No, that's later on. No, first it's steamed before that. When it's steamed, it's a whole fish. They steam the fish whole.
Okay, again, obviously you can't serve a whole fish, right? But
imagine, think about the chicken in the chicken soup. Okay, that's close to being a steamed piece of fish. Would you serve that as shulchan? No, it's like this is not what you could serve. If you baked a piece of chicken, then you would serve it. If you cook it like it's like sort of cooking it wood, no, I don't think you'd serve it.
You say because cooked chicken you wouldn't serve cooked chicken is Oleh shulchan. Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't think so. Okay. Yeah. Anyhow. Okay. So okay. And our last thing. Our last thing is back to eggs, and that is we saw that it's a shayla in the Gemara where the eggs are nechal because they're nechal de chag, and then we pass on l'chumra that they're not considered nechal because they're that's not considered nechal. So Mamela, based on that din, a lot of effort goes into making eggs Bishul Yisroel. Okay, so one thing is in like factories, like there are factories that make hard-boiled eggs. That's one thing. But even more effort goes into if you have an event like a breakfast, a catered breakfast, and they're what they call egg stations. There are people sitting frying eggs for you. So those stations, it's very hard to make those. Not hard. It's a whole pachka to make those Bishul Yisroel because there might be 5 people sitting out there frying eggs for people. There's one mashgiach keeping an eye on all those fires to make sure a fire never goes out. Okay, to make sure those are all Bishul Yisroel. A lot of effort goes into making them so those things are Bishul Yisroel. And the question is that the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch are talking about one part of the question, which is are eggs nechal? We say no, they're not nechal. Either they're nechal de chag, they're not considered nechal. No problem. That's what it says. But there's the other part of the shayla, and that is the not Oleh shulchan. That come on, there are ways to make eggs that are Oleh shulchan. There are quiches that are basically eggs and they're Oleh shulchan. But by and large, most of the eggs in the world that we eat, hard-boiled eggs and scrambled eggs, those things are not Oleh shulchan.
So they eat it for breakfast.
So because we've already said that we follow this standard for us, that Oleh shulchan means is what they eat at a more formal event. Then nobody serves, sunny side up eggs at a formal event like that. It doesn't work like that.
Hard-boiled eggs.
Well, hard-boiled eggs. None of these things. These are not served. None of those things are Oleh shulchan. According to our rules of what Oleh shulchan means, they're not Oleh shulchan. So what goes on here is that the Shulchan Aruch says eggs need Bishul Yisroel, and Kineret for him eggs must have been Oleh shulchan, either because he thought like the Chazanish, or because they really were. Because I mean. My mother told me when she was a little girl, for her birthday, she got an egg. That was her birthday present. So it was Chashav. Okay, so maybe that's it. But that doesn't mean that now. But Lamai says nowadays it's not a shulchan. Okay, so I haven't yet heard a very strong answer to that. Lamai says everyone's makbid on it. Well, everyone is makbid on it. The question is it correct or is there actually a justification?
You should not eat Bishul Yisroel. The question is why are people makbid?
Right. In other words, it's hard to be makel because the Shulchan Aruch says it needs Bishul Yisroel. But the Shulchan Aruch is coming from a Gemara about whether it's Nechal, and that he's being machmir on that thing. No problem. The question, but there are other conditions that we have to think about also.
Obviously, in his time, there was
Well, obviously, he wasn't right to him. That was an obvious piece of information. But we have to think about that. For us,
Can you name one food that was once usher because it was Oleh shulchan melachim, and then people decided, well, it's not Oleh shulchan melachim anymore, and therefore it's going to come with it. It's very hard. Things just doesn't. The Judaism doesn't work that way.
what? Why not?
It's something that's also it's very hard to be conveyed that this thing's going to work.
Wait. I'm asking. I'm asking in a certain sense. I'm asking is that
If it's like that,
No. I'm asking this. If you say to me that we always thought that meat was Oleh shulchan melachim, let's say, and all of a sudden the vegetarians became a stronger force, and nobody will eat meat. For the past 3 years, nobody would touch a piece. They won't eat piece of meat. So he says, guys, it's for 1,000 years we've been eating meat. For 2 weeks, we've been listening to the vegetarians. So let's not make such a quick decision. Let's take our time before we jump on like that. Just because something changed so quickly. Okay, but this didn't change yesterday. This isn't like a day.
I can hear one day in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years from now, all Rabbanim must be mata showers at doctor. They'll say it's a shovel from nefesh. I can hear there'll be a day where they'll come with it. Today, very few people are out there. There are very few people out there.
I'm asking this.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It doesn't take. It's not 2 weeks or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. It's like a door, like a generation before.
So how long do you want? So I've been answering the question for a long time already, and it's not news that they don't serve hard-boiled eggs at weddings. It's been a long time. She probably won't want me to tell you how old she is. I don't know. A long time ago.
40s, 50s.
A long time ago. So anyhow, okay. So that's it's a question. Again, we're still not put on it, but why exactly?
I'm with sort of the